Some of the loneliest people look completely fine in a crowded room. They laugh on cue, answer politely, and still leave feeling strangely untouched. Nothing dramatic happened, yet something inside them never actually arrived. They were physically there, but emotionally, they stayed behind thick glass. If that feeling follows you everywhere, you're not broken or ungrateful. You're probably carrying a kind of loneliness most people never learn to name. It isn't always about being alone or having nobody around. Sometimes it's about being unseen in places where everyone assumes you're connected. You can have texts, plans, coworkers, family dinners, and still feel emotionally unclaimed. You can be included and still feel like nobody actually met you. That kind of loneliness is confusing because it doesn't look lonely from the outside. And when your pain has no obvious explanation, you start doubting your own experience. You tell yourself you're being dramatic, sensitive, or impossible to satisfy. So you smile harder and become even easier for others to misunderstand. A lot of people think loneliness comes from isolation, but that's only one version. Another version comes from constantly editing yourself to stay emotionally safe. You learn to say enough, but never too much. You stay present in conversations while hiding the parts that feel most real. People leave thinking they know you, and you leave feeling more invisible than before. Because being liked is not the same thing as being known. And being surrounded is not the same thing as being reached. Some people started doing this so early they barely notice it now. They grew up around attention, noise, expectations, or criticism, but not emotional attunement. Their feelings were tolerated only when those feelings stayed convenient for everyone else. So they learned a survival skill that looked a lot like maturity. They became easygoing, observant, useful, and hard to truly find. They could read the room before speaking and sense shifts others completely missed. They learned when to soften themselves, when to joke, and when to disappear. That ability helped them belong, but it made real closeness harder. Because closeness requires risk, and risk once felt expensive. If being honest once brought rejection, embarrassment, or emotional neglect, your body remembers. Even years later, your nervous system may still treat connection like a test. So when people get close, you don't always relax. Sometimes you perform calm while bracing for misunderstanding. Sometimes you answer questions without revealing anything that actually matters. Sometimes you keep conversations moving so nobody notices how far away you feel. And sometimes you disappear emotionally before anyone can leave first. That is why loneliness can show up most strongly in social settings. Alone, at least the emptiness makes sense and doesn't pretend to be connection. Around others, the contrast becomes brutal. You can feel your own distance while hearing laughter 5 feet away. You can sit at a dinner table and feel nobody could survive your silence. You can leave a party more drained than a night by yourself. Because the hardest loneliness isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's the pressure of being present without feeling emotionally safe enough to exist. You start noticing little things most people brush past. The moment someone changes the subject after you say something honest. The blank nod when you reveal something tender, and nobody slows down. The way people love your cheerful version but skip your complicated one. The way they ask how you are while already looking past you. These moments seem small, but they stack quietly over years. Eventually, your loneliness stops feeling situational and starts feeling personal. You don't just think, nobody gets me. You start wondering whether maybe you are somehow ungettable. That thought can become a hidden identity. You become the one who feels deeply but never fully lands anywhere. The one who can comfort everyone else but never knows where to place yourself. The one who seems calm while carrying constant emotional static underneath. And because you're thoughtful, you don't just feel loneliness. You analyze it, monitor it, and make it mean something about your worth. That's where it gets heavier. The mind starts building explanations that feel intelligent but secretly keep the wound alive. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm too detached. Maybe I expect intimacy that real life simply doesn't offer. Maybe everyone feels this and just handles it better. But a lot of what you call loneliness is actually disconnection from your unedited self. It's what happens when your social life is built around manageability instead of mutual truth. People may know your schedule, your humor, your opinions, and your favorite shows, but they still might not know what your sadness sounds like in real time. They might not know what makes you shut down after a crowded afternoon. They might not know how often you replay conversations searching for hidden rejection. They might not know how exhausting it feels to be emotionally precise around emotionally vague people. And if they don't know those things, part of you stays alone. Not because they are evil or cold, but because surface-level inclusion can never answer deeper emotional hunger. Some people feel lonely around others because they are constantly translating themselves. They simplify their depth so nobody gets uncomfortable. They remove the darker edges, the strange thoughts, and the tender details. They learn to speak in ways that won't require too much explanation. Over time, that creates a painful split. There's the social self that functions. And then there's the inner self that waits backstage, untouched and increasingly convinced nobody wants it. That inner self notices everything. It notices when you leave conversations feeling emptier than before. It notices when you are appreciated for helping, but never asked anything real. It notices when people enjoy your presence but cannot hold your complexity. And it keeps score in silence. This is also why highly observant people can feel especially lonely. They pick up on emotional texture other people completely miss. They hear what wasn't said. They feel the distance inside polite interactions. They notice when someone is replying from habit instead of actual presence. That awareness can be a gift, but it can also be isolating, especially when you're surrounded by people who live comfortably on emotional autopilot. You start craving a level of depth that feels rare and hard to ask for. Not intensity all the time, just sincerity. Just one conversation where you don't have to keep yourself on a leash. Just one moment where your inner life doesn't feel like too much paperwork for someone else. And when that doesn't happen for a while, loneliness turns physical. Your chest feels tight in ordinary rooms. Your shoulders stay braced during harmless conversations. You come home tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Because your body spent hours being socially available while emotionally unsupported. That kind of exhaustion is real. You're not weak for feeling drained by relationships that never reach you. You're not asking for impossible magic. You're asking for contact that feels alive. There's also another layer people rarely talk about. Sometimes loneliness around others comes from grieving the version of connection you needed earlier. Not just friends, not just romance, but the original feeling of being emotionally welcomed without having to earn it. If that was inconsistent growing up, your heart may still be looking for it. And adult interactions can accidentally reopen that old ache. A delayed text feels bigger than a delayed text. A distracted response feels older than the moment itself. Being half-heard can trigger the same loneliness you felt years ago in smaller rooms. That's why some people feel childish when they get lonely. But it isn't childish. It's old. It's the nervous system recognizing a familiar emptiness and sounding the alarm again. The hard part is that loneliness can make you do opposite things at once. You want closeness, but you pull back. You want honesty, but you become vague. You want to be chosen, but you act like you need nothing. You want someone to notice, but you hide the very thing that needs noticing. So the cycle continues. You stay lonely, then blame yourself for being hard to reach. But being hard to reach is often what happens after being reached carelessly. Some walls were not built from ego. They were built from experience. And some silence is not emptiness. It's self-protection that never got updated after the danger passed. The answer isn't forcing yourself to become instantly open with everyone. That usually creates more regret, not more connection. The answer is noticing where you're present, but not actually participating. Noticing where you're liked for your function, instead of known for your truth. Noticing which relationships leave your body softer, and which ones make you vanish inside. That matters more than social quantity ever will. Because loneliness is not always cured by more people. Sometimes it lessens when one space becomes real enough for your guard to loosen. One friend who listens without rushing. One conversation where you don't have to make your pain palatable. One relationship where silence doesn't mean disinterest and honesty doesn't create punishment. That is how many lonely people begin healing. Not through sudden popularity, but through finally experiencing emotional safety in small, believable doses. Then something shifts. You stop chasing rooms that make you feel absent. You stop confusing access with intimacy. You stop calling yourself needy for wanting reciprocity. And slowly your loneliness becomes information instead of identity. It tells you where you disappear. It tells you what your heart still protects. It tells you which connections are crowded but hollow. And it points you toward what actually nourishes you. Real connection usually feels quieter than people expect. Less performance. Less proving. Less pressure to be impressive. More breathing room. More specificity. More moments where you realize you didn't have to abandon yourself to stay loved. That is the kind of connection lonely people are truly hungry for. Not constant attention. Not being admired by everyone. Just the rare relief of being emotionally met without having to translate your soul. So, if you feel lonely around others, don't rush to label yourself difficult. Ask a gentler question instead. Where did I learn that being fully myself might cost me belonging? That question changes everything. Because now you're not just judging the loneliness. You're understanding its logic. And once you understand its logic, you can stop treating it like a personal failure. You can start building a life where your presence is not just visible. It's felt, including by you. Maybe that is the deeper goal. Not to never feel lonely again, but to stop abandoning yourself in places that were never really holding you. To stop shrinking just to avoid the ache of being misread. To stop calling emotional hunger a flaw. And to remember that your loneliness may not mean you need more people. It may mean you need more truth. More safety. More spaces where your inner life doesn't have to fight for oxygen. Because the deepest loneliness was never just being alone. It was being surrounded while slowly disappearing inside yourself. And the first real step out of that darkness is noticing you were there. The second is believing you deserve something more honest than survival. And the moment you stop betraying yourself for connection, loneliness begins to loosen. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But enough for your life to finally start feeling inhabited. Enough for your voice to sound like yours again. Enough for one real connection to matter more than 100 empty ones. And sometimes, that is where your real life quietly begins.